All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Majoy from Newburgh Heights PD. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. He has some really interesting concepts, insights, words of wisdom. So, welcome to the show, Chief Majoy. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's a very important topic, so I admire what you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I don't think I asked you offline. How many years have you been in law enforcement total?
35.
Wow, 35 years. That's amazing. What is your why? Why did you get started in this profession 35 years ago?
Well, actually, I started off as a dispatcher just because I thought it would be cool. And growing up, we had a scanner at the house, so I always listened to the police scanner and everything that was going on. And so I did. I became a police dispatcher, and it was about maybe 6 or 8 months into it. The chief of police said, "Hey, kid, I think you should really consider going to the police academy." And I'm like, "Hey, I don't know." And he
Mhm.
was like, "No, I'm serious. I think you should." I'm like, "Okay, well, I was 20 years old at the time. I'm like, okay, I'll think about it." And so one thing led to another, and I went to the police academy, and here I am this many years later. And so I've walked a lot of miles in a lot of different shoes, from dispatcher to, undercover agent to patrol officer, SWAT team, supervisor to chief of police. And so don't know everything, don't profess to know everything, but I bring some longevity to the table that I enjoy sharing with others.
Yeah. How important do you think it is to have different perspectives and different roles within the agency? One of the things I hear a lot is, I think people don't realize how challenging, being a dispatcher really is, or how challenging having certain roles within the agency are. And so, do you think that kind of gave you perspective and the ability to empathize and to relate and then to be able to like maybe create more of that team environment now that you are chief of police?
I think it does. When I was a part-time dispatcher, 6 months into it, I'm working the midnight shift by myself,
Mm.
and we had a double fatal. And this is the first time I had experienced anything like this. And I've got, several different fire departments, several different police departments, a helicopter coming to the scene, and here I am behind the scenes. And before computers. We had a typewriter, showing my age just a little bit, but it does offer a perspective. And in terms of dispatchers, the job has become much, much more complex. I say this often, and that is that dispatchers are the most underappreciated members of the criminal justice system because of what they do. And I've always said, if the police officers win the lottery and quit, we'll just go and find more. But if the dispatchers go and win the lottery and quit, then we're screwed, because it's really hard to find good quality dispatchers. And so, bringing that perspective to the table, but also using the philosophy as none of us are as smart as all of us, getting a perspective from all different rank and file, I think is also important.
Yeah, and I think too, no matter what role you're in, no matter what profession you're in, everyone wants to feel like what they do is valued and that, they are respected by the people around them. And I think the more that we can have that energy with people and we can like show up for people and say, hey, like I might not be able to relate to what you do, but I appreciate what you do and I value what you do, and you are an integral part of this team. I think that is a key component to retention and like keeping people there because they feel like people care about what they do. And the reverse is true. I would imagine if you're a dispatcher in an agency where they just ignore you and they don't include you, they don't like say good job and they don't really care about what you do, then like why would you want to stay there and do an incredibly challenging job when there isn't that like value on the other end or that support on the other end?
No, I agree with you, and I think that it's nice to give and receive recognition. And
Mm.
we'll send food down to the dispatchers just randomly. We'll send some pizzas down there. We'll make some food or whatever, and just a show of appreciation. And then, if we have a critical incident or something like that where they, go above and beyond, which they do often, we'll be sure to recognize them because they keep us safe, they keep us alive, and asking the right questions and giving us pre-arrival instructions, whether it's police, fire, EMS, So it is important, and I think it is the, there's some people that don't need a whole lot of pat on the back, but others do, and I don't think it's an everyday thing, but I think that when you call people and say you did a nice job in that, nice work, or congratulations on this arrest, or how you handled this investigation, or the dispatchers how they handled a certain call, I think that that's important to give them the recognition because it is a tough job and it's a hard job.
Yeah. Well, and I think that like we're all people, like everyone within your profession, my profession, within the community, within the world, we're all people. And I always think about like relationships, when I think about like how I want to show up for people around me. And I always kind of relate this to maybe like a romantic relationship, right? Because everyone can kind of relate to that. It's like there are maybe, and maybe this is stereotypical, but generally speaking, I think like, the guy in the relationship maybe like doesn't showcase that they need as much of that like emotional support or validation. But, sometimes more as like women, we're like, we want that, like we want you to tell us we're pretty or like we're doing a good job or whatever. But every man, I think, can relate to if you walk up, like if your partner walks up to you and says, I really appreciate you. Like, I appreciate you taking out the trash. Like, I appreciate you doing the dishes. Like, thank you for showing up for me today when I was having a bad day. Even if you are not the type of person that generally asks for that or needs that, it feels good to get that, and maybe that's not specifically like your quote unquote love language of like what you need, but I don't think that there's anyone in this world that doesn't appreciate that when someone goes out of their way to just, randomly just be like, you know what? Thank you. I appreciate that.
Sure, and it is. It's good to hear those things. As leaders, we have to recognize those things, and sometimes just, a little pat on the back, a thank you, appreciation, sharing duties at times. Just not that long ago, I actually took a marked unit out. I was out and about, and we had a very minor call, and I was close, and I told the guys, I'm like, just, I'll take care of it. I'm right there, And it's like, wow, the chief's handling this call for us, and it wasn't that big of a deal, but just helping them out and just giving them the support. I think that that is a key part to keeping officers happy and recognizing them and knowing that you're going to support them if something happens or they just need to talk or whatever the case may be.
Well, and I think it's all associated with wellness, creating that culture where, again, people are happier, healthier, they want to show up for each other, they want to show up and do a good job, they feel valued, they feel supportive. Again, we talked about how that's retention. People are going to want to stay longer if there's an environment that's supportive. And I know that wellness is something that's a priority for you. You and I talked offline, and this is something that you've really dedicated, this particular title that you have now to really trying to prioritize wellness within your organization. And I want to ask you the same question I asked you before, but in the context of wellness, why is wellness so important to you?
Well, I think for a number of reasons, life has its stressors, no matter who you are, what you do. Your laundry or your washing machine breaks, your car breaks down, you got a leaky roof, you got stuck in traffic, you got an unexpected bill. You're going to get these stressors in life, and work should not be one of those stressors. And so I think it starts by creating or cultivating a culture where people don't mind coming into work. They get up in the morning and they're just not dreading their day
Yeah.
because then they're not going to be productive. They're not going to be happy. And kind of the analogy of a happy employee is a productive employee. And so we want officers to come into an environment, an atmosphere where they are appreciated, where, we're going to have our normal stressors here. We're going on calls for service. We're seeing people, good people at their worst times. And sometimes having to deliver bad news or, arresting someone or giving someone a citation or whatever. And so, those are just going to add to the stress levels. But coming into the office and coming into working together with people, one of the things I say to our officers is, listen, I don't expect you to go and drink beer and eat wings after work and sing Kumbaya, but you're going to get along. And if you can't get along, you're going to get out. It's as simple as that. You don't have to be buddy buddy with everyone at the office. And as a matter of fact, I discourage that. You should have a life outside of policing. I see too many people that get way too in depth and way too involved in policing that they live, eat, and breathe it. And it's like, that's too much, in my opinion. Have a balance in your life and have something else, whatever your hobbies and things that you do when you're not working, but it shouldn't always be policing. But getting back to the terms of wellness, we have to provide that because of the basic stressors that we deal with each and every day as law enforcement, and those can be challenging at times. And so you want to try to minimize the number of stressors that they have, with the understanding that there's going to be some.
Right. Yeah, and I think it kind of goes to that concept of like control the controllable. You might not be able to control some of the calls that you get or the people that you encounter throughout a shift, but you can control how you show up for each other, your actions, your reactions, your mindset. And I had a chief one time say this, and I related to this, but he had said that he tries to remove any of the cancer within the organization. And it's kind of what you said of like, maybe you guys don't have to be like buddy buddy all the time, but like having that negativity is something that you want to try to eliminate, right? Because again, it's back to like the culture that you're trying to cultivate and then the mission and the vision that you're trying to move forward within the organization. And positivity is contagious and negativity is also contagious. And so how can you control the environment within the organization to be as positive as possible? Because we know that the environment outside is maybe not so much sometimes, and you can't control that, right?
Right. Well, so there's a saying in leadership. It's called the 80-20 rule, and that is that 80% of your problems are caused by 20% of your people.
Mm,
And it doesn't mean that you need to dedicate all of your resources to the 20 percenters, but you need to be objective and try to minimize the 80-20 rule to make it a 99-1 or something like that, or a 100-0. And the 20 percenters at times, sometimes you just need to look and see, is there a root cause? There's some folks that they're just negative. They win the lottery and they got split with someone and they're mad about it, that type of analogy. Whereas, others, there could be something in their life that's bothering them. There could be something that happened. And so this is why, we need to watch out for one another. And if you have an employee who's doing really good and all of a sudden they're doing really bad, or they're just, very poor attitude, you can't just write those people off, and you can't just, oh, that's just Tom. That's the way always Tom has been. That's really not a good approach. Rather, what's the underlying reason? Why is Tom like that? And,
yeah.
is there a root cause to that, and try to figure out what that is. But to what you said, the cancers, you need to get rid of those. And some people are just not a fit for policing. It doesn't make them a bad person. It's just they're just not fit for it, or they may not even be fit for that department. I worked with someone at a much younger age who lost his job, but as advanced his career to a very high-ranking position in a different state and is doing amazing.
Mm.
So sometimes you're just not a fit. It doesn't mean it's the end of the world, but you need to be somewhere where you're going to be happy and you can be productive. And as leaders, we just need to recognize that.
Yeah, I appreciate that you said the root cause, because a lot of what you see on the surface is more of a symptom. It's not the root of the problem, right? And so when it comes to wellness, especially like what we see, and I've experienced this myself, is, you kind of shove things down, right, over time, and whether that's stuff at work or stuff at home, and you don't really deal with it, and you kind of just pile it on top of each other until finally you do start to see the symptoms of not dealing or processing those things, right? And so we start to see, um, maybe poor behavior, absenteeism, sick time, maybe unhealthy coping mechanisms. Maybe it starts to manifest itself in the form of negativity or anger, lashing out, or, there's a lot of different symptoms that we could, talk about. But one of the things that I've noticed is, this kind of idea, and I think it's human nature, but I think especially in the first responder profession, is like, things aren't allowed to like impact you, right? Like you have to kind of posture up and be like, this isn't impacting me. Like and it almost, and we talked about this before, it almost becomes like you are not human. And there's this idea that maybe you're like a superhero and bulletproof and that things aren't going to impact you. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because you had said that to me that, you're not bulletproof and you don't like carry an S on your chest. And so, how do we relay that message that you are human and it's okay to let things impact you and it's okay to get the resources that you need to be able to offload that cumulative stress?
Well, I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we face in policing. And, I wish that there was a one size fits all solution to that, but there's not. And, as police officers, we compartmentalize things and we, like you said, you stack them up, you put them on a shelf, or you just bury them inside of you.
Mm.
And eventually the things that they eventually start to get to you. And so, police officers are really good at helping others and telling others, this is a family problem. You go on a domestic and you solve a problem, between a married couple or parents and a child, or you go to a dispute somewhere, a neighbor dispute or something like that, and we're really good at helping other people, and telling them how to do those kind of things and how to get their lives back on track and find resources for them, which is wonderful. But the only problem is that we're horrible about doing that for ourselves.
Right.
And when I say that, I can't emphasize it enough. And as such as not to say to demean police officers, and not that at all. I mean, it's the hardest profession in the world, in my opinion. But we need to do better in terms of recognizing things and understanding that we don't have capes, we don't have an S on our chest, we're not bulletproof, and things get to us. There's only so much, blood, guts, gore, problems, fights, shots fired, people injured or killed in crashes or fires or whatever the case may be. Eventually the things start to get to you, and when you see reports on the news, you see a bad situation where someone's killed or there's a bad crash and someone's killed, someone's got to go there and handle those things, and those are the first responders, police, fire, EMS. And you have to be able to recognize that you're not this impregnable force, that we all have something inside of us. And then I get it, some people have a little bit more than others, but at the end of the day, we need to be able to go and release that, and we need to be able to talk about that. And we don't want to carry our work home with us. Our home life is our private life, and you really don't want the work to have to impact that any more than it has to. And so, if there's one thing that I could wish upon it, and that it would be that we would get better at recognizing that. But I also think that, from a leadership role, that we be proactive. And so, when there is a critical incident, then you don't wait and see how they're doing, whether it's good or bad. You do something before that happens, before it gets to that point. So, we had a critical incident one time. We had an officer who is early 20s, his first police job. He'd been on the job 2 weeks and goes to this shooting, and it was a bad one. Not that there's a good one, but this one was really bad, and it really impacted him and the other officers on the shift. And we brought in a group of counselors who were police officers and firefighters who were specially trained to do this, and we didn't give them an option. We just said, "Hey, we're doing this. Everybody's at work one night. You're going to turn off your radios, and the rest of us are going to cover your calls. You just go and talk to these guys. Whatever they talked about, I don't know, and it's none of my business." But I do know that it was impactful to them, and they didn't have a choice. And I didn't force it down their throats, but I just said, "Listen, I think you should do this. You're not obligated to, but just listen to what they have to say." And afterwards, they're like, "Man, I'm really glad that you did this." And so I think that we just need to, as leaders, we have to kind of have a crystal ball in front of us, and we have to be able to forecast things in many fashions. But one of them is, the wellness of our police officers.
Yeah, I agree that proactive wellness is always going to be the best. How can you get in front of things and then when things do go um, sideways or, things are difficult, then how can you have it on the back end as well? And you can still be proactive even on the back end. One of the things that I heard recently that stuck with me was someone said, "You are not weak, you are human." And I think that the more we can put that message out there, because I think that there still is this idea that, like, if that does impact me, that equals weakness. And if we can say, no, that is not weakness, that means that you are human, and that's okay that you are human, then maybe there's going to be more of that acceptance. And I think that the more we can have conversations like this of like, hey, like, these things impacted me, or like this is what I went through, in my life, and these are the things that helped me. I think the more, again, acceptance that we can start to build. Um, how have you seen, because you mentioned home life, how have you seen undealt trauma or stress impact personal and home lives?
Well, I've had a number of situations myself personally, but other times with other officers that you see where things impact them. And, you sometimes spend more time with the officers you work with than you do your families at times. And so keeping that in mind when you see a change in someone, whether it's their demeanor, whether they're really snappy, you say something that sets them off, or they're really edgy, or they're not their normal happy self. Again, you have to kind of watch for these things. And so, you know, I think the old school thinking was that, like you had just said, that like it's a show of weakness, and the policing was like that for a long time. I think we're getting better, but we're not quite there yet. And this is one of those things where, leadership's not a one day thing, it's an everyday thing. Well, apply that same thinking to wellness. It has to be an everyday thing. And I get it. You don't need to go overboard on it, but you need to just know that the signs are going to be there, know what some of the indicators are, and then also have a plan on how to deal with it because this is not a one size fits all kind of thing. And, folks have personal problems outside of work that, could impact their performance as well. So, I mean, I think that one of the fixes is that I would recommend that we start in the police academies and we start teaching a block on wellness and let those folks that are coming out understand that it's not a sign of weakness at all. In fact, I look at it as the polar opposite, and I think that that's a sign of strength.
Mhm.
Uh, that you have the moral courage and fortitude to come forth and say something if it's bothering you, versus bottling it up and pretending that it doesn't. And I think that part of it is with the other officers, and that is that I don't want to say the word hazing because that's really not quite like that. But, if officers are getting on other officers or something like that or making fun of them, that's like grade school, middle school kind of stuff, maybe into high school. But, we're professionals and, you don't make fun of people. You accept people and you accept them no matter what. And if they've got if they're crying because they just left a fatal accident involving a child, then that's understandable. Or if they,
Yeah.
had a critical incident and it's impacting them, then you don't make fun of them. Give them a hug or just, hey, listen, I'm here for you. Tell me what you need. And I think that it starts with that. It also goes back to leadership and communication. But again, if we could start in the academies and start teaching police officers like that, and I think that annually, we do continued professional training. I think that there should be a block on officer wellness and just understand what it is and not compartmentalize it, but come forward with it and speak up and say something. I think that those are critical.
Yeah, I really actually like that idea of integrating wellness with annual training. And I do think that they go hand in hand. And I always talk about kind of a three-step process when it comes to like forward movement and growth. And the first one being awareness, awareness around maybe the issues or the challenges, understanding that, if you don't take care of it, these are some of the things that could happen long term, right? And then the second one would be education. What are maybe some of the things that you can do? What are some of those resources that can help you along the way? And of course, those can look different just depending on what it is that we're talking about. Maybe it's spiritual wellness, maybe it's mental wellness, maybe it's physical wellness, financial, home wellness. What are maybe some of those things that you can actually do? And then the third one is action. And I think that that is arguably maybe one of the most important because nothing changes if nothing changes, right? So, like, in order to make positive change and to be able to set yourself up for success, you have to be willing to do the thing. So, you have awareness, you have education, but then there's implementation of that. And I love that you said that wellness is an everyday thing. And I had a moment recently because we talk about these things all day long, and I think that it's really important for us to also check ourselves, are we practicing what we are preaching? Are we prioritizing those things for ourselves as well? And I was sick recently and like not feeling good, but like kind of on the mend, and I was like, man, like I know I need to go and do something for myself right now because I was like not like mentally feeling great. Like, I had just been like kind of like on the couch for a few days or whatever. And I went to the gym and I did like 10 minutes because that was all I could do. Like at the end, I was like, okay, that's it. That's all I got. And I remember like leaving and kind of being like, man, like that wasn't good enough. And then I had to remind myself that it does not matter. Every like little progress is progress, And so if you can just remember that, like every day, even if it's an inch forward, it's still progress. And that could be in the context of anything. But even if maybe one day you just tell yourself something positive instead of something negative. If maybe one day you practice a breathing technique for a minute, when you feel stressed, I think that if we can remind ourselves that it's an everyday thing, but it's also like an incremental thing, then it feels a little less overwhelming.
No, I agree with what you're saying, and I think that, it's kind of the crawl, walk, run kind of thing. You start off slow and you progressively get better. And 10 minutes at the gym is better than 0 minutes at the gym.
Yep.
I think that that's good. And while you're talking, one of the things that sparked with me is I remember back in the 90s, there was a movie out called Super Size Me, and it was about a gentleman who ate fast food 3 times a day for 30 days, and he put on massive amounts of weight. He gained like 25 pounds, and it put him into like a depressed state. And his doctor, he was seeing a doctor regularly, and how it was impacting his health. And but also part of the movie was like a study that had been done on a school that quit serving pop, and with loaded with sugar. They were serving more healthy drinks than soda and things like that. And again, police officers, you work 24 hours a day, you got to get a quick lunch, so fast food is an easy out. But really, intermittently, maybe not so bad, but often, maybe not so much. And so I think that it's more um, involved that we need to just watch, what we eat, but also, like you said, 10 minutes at the gym, like go walk around the block, and just decompress a little bit, do something versus sitting around and, even if it's on duty, you got to walk around a little bit. That's okay too, and some departments have gyms and hey, go walk on the treadmill for 10 minutes. It's a start of something just to kind of clear your head a little bit. So I do agree with you that, we get into these funks and sometimes we can climb out by ourselves, but other times we need a little bit of a boost, and that's okay if we do.
Yeah. And I think too, like understanding that like there are other people who go through the same things that you do too. I was just having a conversation recently with an officer locally, and we were having the same kind of conversation of like sometimes it feels so isolating, like when you're going through stuff or like you're trying to find the motivation or, whatever it is. And the more you can start talking to people and understand that like we all go through that. We all struggle to find the time. We all struggle to find the motivation. We all like, have like maybe not the exact same things because we all have our own unique experiences in life. But I think we all experience similar things. And I think the more we can understand that there is a community around us that is supportive and also going through similar things, the less isolating and the less alone we feel. And I think that that's a really important message because especially when you're kind of on a downhill moment, peaks and valleys, maybe you're in a valley and I think we tend to kind of feel like we are the only ones who have ever experienced that before. But I think that we have to start to like zoom out a little bit and understand that like we're all here for each other and we all, go through similar things. And one of the things that you talked to me offline about that really kind of stuck out to me, and I was hoping you could maybe share your experience with this. And you said that recently you attended a funeral for a fallen officer. can you give a little bit of background into what happened? And I know that there were thousands and thousands of people who showed up to this. And what did it feel like in that moment to also like see the community and understand that you are a part of a supportive community?
So recently, Lorain, Ohio Police Department had a shooting where two officers were parked. They were eating their lunch, and someone just ambushed them.
Mm.
And one of the officers was struck in in the hand and got shipped out really, and he's doing well. One of the responding officers got hit. He was hospitalized for a bit. He's out. But one of the officers was killed. And the radio broadcast went out. We heard it was going on. It's about maybe 25, 30 miles west of where I'm situated at, but it impacts us all. And they brought the injured officer to Cleveland Metro Hospital, which is a level one trauma center. And so the officer was still alive. And so they were sending out updates. And the following day, I went over to the hospital to visit the police chief and just let him know, that we're behind him. I serve on the executive board for the Ohio Association of Chiefs of Police, so I went there as a representative and just let them know that we were behind them if there's any resources that they needed. Of course, there was a plethora of those available to him. But in the days that followed, he passed away. It was like the following day or 2 days later, and they had the funeral. And it was so big that they held it at Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse, which is where the Cleveland Cavaliers play, and it's a very large venue. I would guess that there was probably 8 to 10,000 people there. And it was a wonderful service, sad, of course, because of the nature of it. But, Officer Wagner was in his 30s. He had two small children. He was a veteran, served in the military, and was living just a wonderful life. And it got taken from him. And so it impacts us all, no matter what. You think that, you're safe getting fuel in your car, walking in and out of the building, or stopping somewhere and sharing a pizza somewhere, but they weren't. And so, but on a favorable note was the amount of love and support that comes out. And, sometimes these things are a reminder for us that, the overwhelming majority of the public does support us. And so there was a funeral procession that went quite a distance, and every overpass was lined with firemen with their ladder trucks up draping flags, and alongside the freeway on each side there were people holding up flags, and cars coming the other way that didn't even know about were pulling over and getting out and just saluting or waving and just showing, hand on their heart kind of thing. And it kind of hits home a little bit because the amount of support that was given for this officer, and by total strangers even, but they wanted to just show their support and the sacrifice that this officer made. And so it's a reminder for all of us that, we are respected, we are appreciated. We may not see it every day, but that's okay. I've been to more of these than I really particularly care to mention or recall, and I pray that I never have to go to another one again. But because they are very sad, and it does hit home, it kind of brings the reality to it that, you see the officer's wife there and his family there, and just the grief that they are undergoing is just unimaginable. Um, but the love and support was tremendous, and so again, a good reminder, kind of a silver lining to a horrible situation, and there's a lot of support out there for the officers, but. Let's not wait until something like that happens to just recognize officers and know that they're appreciated, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. I'm like getting emotional while you're talking, and what an incredible tragedy. Can't imagine. But I do appreciate, sorry, I'm like trying to hold it together. I do appreciate the sentiment of just reminding everyone that like you matter, and
Mhm.
coming together as a community and loving and supporting each other always, not just in times of tragedy. And of course, like especially in times of tragedy, like you need to like hold each other up, but like having that um proactiveness to it as well and just reminding each other that like you care about them and you value them and you love them and trying to not just as an organization, and I think, of course, as a community, if there are any people who are listening to this podcast who are a part of the general public in the community, to your point of like letting your officers and your first responders know that they're um, valued and appreciated, I think is so important. And so I appreciate you sharing that. And I think that, we always have this saying of like family
Mhm.
and family first, and I think that that could also be organizational family, but it's also obviously your home family, and I know that we'll talk about that a little bit, but my question to you is, how do you prepare the younger generation for the realities of this career? Because obviously you can't control everything, and what you just explained was awful. And I can't even imagine. And of course, like you said, they thought they were safe and they were eating lunch, and that's just terrible. But how do you prepare the next generation to understand some of these realities and have maybe the preparedness for the job, but also be equipped with the tools to be able to process some of the harsher realities or the harder realities of this career? And I know you talked about, academy and training. And so what is your experience with that?
Well, I think that one of the things we have to look at is this generation, and there's generation changes. And so, in looking back, when I was a young officer, I look back at younger me, and I see this annoying guy that probably drove the chief nuts at times. And but I had a good police chief, and he was a good mentor, and he was very understanding. And I think that we have to adapt to that generation. In other words, we can't come in and say, "Hey, you got to adapt to us." I think we need to adapt to them, and that's an easier said than done, and it's a very tall order. But we have to understand, that some of us, we grew up with a phone attached to the wall and answering machines. We didn't have cell phones and internet, and
Yep.
we had pagers, and you could get to a phone, and when I started, there wasn't computers in the cars. There was typewriters at times, and so I think just adapting to that and having an understanding of the generational gap, and it's not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. But I also think that you need to mentally and physically prepare them for it. Not become cynical about things. Understand you're going to see people at their worst, not their best, but know that you are appreciated, that we get a lot of thank yous and all the time, and it seems a lot more prevalent now than it was in years past, and I think it's a good thing, but I also think that with this generation is just, sometimes you have to adapt to them. You have to be a chameleon, and again, recognizing what some of their needs are, what's going to help boost them, what's going to help, keep them from getting in trouble, and being successful in all aspects of their career. So I think that we do need to adapt to that, and again, as I said, I think that's a bit of a tall order, but it's something that we can accomplish. And I have officers that were born, before I or after I started policing. I've been in policing longer than they've been alive.
Yeah.
And so having that understanding, but also a mutual respect for them, and I don't agree with hazing the new guy. I don't agree with, respect is earned, it's not taken. And so I think that, we need to earn their respect just as much as they are with us. And so we shouldn't demand or command respect, but rather you got to earn it. And having that understanding and recognizing their wants and their needs, what's going to work for them. I think that that is a really key point to it. And again, there's going to be another generational change, and these young officers are going to be dealing with the annoying new guy in the next 15 or 20 years, and they're going to have to adapt to their wants and needs, which are going to be different than what today offers, and that's okay. But that's just the evolution of policing in society. But if we work together and adjust those things, I think we're going to be just fine.
Yeah, this is really kind of a full circle message as well, because we talked earlier, like people want to feel valued and people want to feel like they matter. And if you walk in and you're like, you're young and you're a newer generation and we don't really care what you think, it's not really going to set the foundation for a successful future, because there's going to be conflict in that. People don't want to work in an environment where someone's going to come up and be like, your generation sucks and you're going to do it our way, to be like really blunt and like, and of course, the generation before you felt the same way about you, so like you said, it's the evolution of it. And I really appreciate that mindset. You teach at the Basic Academy and you have the 6 keys to being successful in law enforcement. Can you maybe share a little bit about that block that you teach and what are the keys to success?
So I teach at several academies in my spare time, which is not a lot, but I do it for the love of the game. I don't do it because I have to or anything else. I just I love the profession, and so one of the classes I teach is the very first introductory class. It is day one. These young kids come in there, and you can hear a pin drop in the room. Everybody's prim and proper. And it doesn't stay like that. But
Yeah.
one of the exercises, there's 2 key exercises that I give them, but one of them, I jokingly refer to it as John Boy's 6 keys to a successful career, and that John Boy being me in a joking fashion, because
Mhm.
my first name is John. And I say to them, okay, take out a piece of paper, put your name on it, today's date, and write down 1 through 6. Okay, and then they're getting their papers out and they're writing, and then they're very intent on what I'm saying. I said, okay, this was going to be the 6 keys to a successful career. I said, but before you start writing, I just want you to look at me and hear what I'm going to tell you. Okay, and they're all very intent, very focused in on me. And I said, okay, is everybody ready? Yeah, 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 very anxious. I said, okay, here you go. Before you write anything down, here's the 6 keys. Shut up and do your job. And they kind of look at me like, that's it? I'm like, okay, one more time. Shut up and do your job. I said, okay, say it with me. So the whole class, shut up and do your job. And I said, I realized that, I give them a minute to write down, but I explained to them, right now, there's nothing that's bothering you. You're not unhappy about your shift. You're not unhappy about the contract negotiations. You're not unhappy because this person got a new car and you didn't. There's nothing bothering you right now. Don't let it bother you
Mhm.
because those things are going to happen. And you're going to have things that are just going to be like, gosh darn it. But though, go back to the shut up and do your job because so much of this gets officers in trouble. And maybe not so much in trouble internally that are going to get disciplined or something, but it's going to bring about unnecessary stress. None of that stuff bothers you right now, so don't let it.
Yeah.
Because there's going to be guys that are being gender neutral, guys, girls, whatever, are going to be the negative nannies that are going to just complain about stuff, and they're looking for people to jump on their negative bandwagon. There's plenty of room on that, and don't take a seat on that bus. Rather, take the high road on things, and don't let those things bother you because they're going to happen. But right now, you're early in your career. None of that stuff bothers you at all. So,
Yeah.
stay focused on those 6 keys. And I said, no matter what, I said, if you're having a bad day and something's bothering you, go back to this piece of paper and take a look at that. That's
Yeah.
the.
Well, and I
But the
think
other part, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think that like, the way that I kind of like dissected that in my head too was like, how can you, excuse me, develop a positive mindset over time, and how can you prevent yourself from getting into a negative mindset? And I think that it is so much easier to think about all the negative stuff, and I've been called out in my life before. And I'm lucky to have some people in my corner who really want me to win and really want me to succeed. And when they say these things to me, I know that it's out of love and it's not out of judgment or hate. It's because they want me to like genuinely be the best version of myself. And I think that's a key component to this. Like, take advice from people who you know want you to win, not people who want you to lose. And we know the difference, right? And you can kind of see those true colors over time. But I've had people tell me before where they're like, hey, like, you are saying all these negative things, but do you remember this positive thing? And I almost have to be reminded of that. And I'm like, oh, yeah. And they're like, yeah. And then what about this one? And I'm like, oh, yeah. They're like, yeah. And what about this one? And I'm like, oh, yeah. And, I think that sometimes we are only looking for the negative stuff and then that perpetuates. So I like that idea of like, hey, like this is the foundation. You're excited, you're ready, you're grateful, like you want to be here, you want to help people, like you have like your whole life in front of you and like it looks really bright and positive. How can you maintain that over time? Because it's going to be far more easy to look for all the negative things than it is to like really focus on the mission, really focus on your vision and like keeping that framework of positivity. Second one, I know you have a second one that you teach. So what is that?
So what I do is I give them a note card, and I usually get like some pastel colors, like a hot green or pink or yellow or something, and I'll hand one out to everybody, and I'll have them write their name and date on there, and start with that, and then I will tell them, okay, write down three reasons why you want to become a police officer. So whatever those are, write those down. So I'll give them a few minutes, and once they're done, again, this was day one, and I'll say, okay, by a show of hands, how many people put you want to be rich? And they all look at me like I'm nuts. No hands go up. And I said, okay. I said, how many people said, kick ass and take names? They kind of look at me like I'm weird or how many people just want to get back at the public because you got your ass whipped growing up and it's your turn to get back at people, in a joking fashion. And they all kind of look at me like I'm nuts. And I said, okay. I said, well, so what did you say? What did you write? And so you get a random response. And, I want to make the world a better place. I want to give back to the community. I want to do something that, is different every day. I want to make my contribution to society. I want to help people who need help, those types of things. Recently, one of the students was, her response was is that she wants to help people who have mental health issues, and so which is the first time I'd heard that, but it's a very good response because mental illness is not a crime and nor is it a choice, and so for someone to recognize that at a young age going into policing is good. But one of the things I tell them is when we're all done talking about it, and I'll just randomly pick folks throughout the room and have them ask them why. And I said, okay, I said, here's my challenge to you. I said, so, I want to hand the torch over to someone, officers who can carry the torch and do a really good job. And I said, you're going to have some really tough days, and you're going to have some days where, you're going to question yourself or be angry about something. I said, put this note card somewhere where you see it every day. Tape it to your mirror, inside your closet, inside your locker. So when you go into work, you see that. Because sometimes we need to be reminded of the core values that we have coming into this job and not forgetting them. Because you're going to be a different person in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, but you're not going to be a worse person. You're going to be a better person. But sometimes we just need to be reminded of those things and remember that you got to work on Christmas and that sucks, but though this is what you
Mhm.
pledge to do. You got to work, New Year's Eve, or you're going to miss a couple birthday parties and things like that. This is what you signed up for. And so you're not going to get banker's hours. You're going to get police hours. And so sometimes we just need to be reminded of those core values, to keep us on track and just kind of, hit the refresh button, if you will, and kind of recharge our batteries a little bit.
Yeah, I really like the remember where you came from and remember your why. Because I do think that life happens, stress happens, like things, you almost start to get lost in the reason why you're doing things in the first place. And I've definitely been in that position in my life before where you're like, what is the point? Like, what am I doing? Like, it just feels hard, it just feels like heavy. And then if you can kind of take that moment to go back in time and be like, there's a deeper mission here. There's a deeper reason why I did this. And this is why I started doing this in the first place. And then looking for those positive interactions or those positive signs that you're on the right path. So I really like that. I like the like, hey, how can you set the foundation for positivity? And then how can you remember why you're doing the things that you do? So,
And I think that goes one step further because I teach leadership classes, and one of the classes that I do a very similar exercise where I give them two note cards. And the first note card is this exercise we just spoke of, but the second one is give me the three reasons why you want to be in a leadership position.
mm,
And again, I get all kinds of different answers, but a common one is, I want to make the agency a better place to work at, and one of the other exercises I do is by a show of hands, how many people have ever worked for a bad leader? And I've been doing this since like 2011. I think I've had one person not raise their hand, and so everyone's worked for a bad leader at some point, which demonstrates the need for leadership training, but also one of the things that you commented to, and that is, not forgetting where you came from and having that understanding. So take those three reasons why you wanted to become a leader and put those in a place where you're going to see it every day as well. So you bring those values back to the table. And, I've had friends and colleagues, oh, I'm going to take the chief's test or I want to become a police chief. And, what advice do you have for me? And I said, well, I'm going to give you my one piece of advice and it's for
mhm.
free, and that is don't forget where you came from. You were at some point the lowest ranking officer in the department. You were the new guy. You were the new supervisor. And, you know, take the things that you liked and emphasize those, and take the things that you didn't like and change those and make it better for your people. Because again, respect is earned, it's not taken. You don't walk around and say, I'm the boss. That doesn't sell well to your people. Rather, have a mutual respect for them and understand you were in their shoes. And so, with our officers here at the department, I try to uh, keep that in mind when rendering decisions, and, personnel decisions are not personal decisions. And, sometimes we have to make the tough ones, but um, we have to be firm but fair, but also respect and understand where they're coming from. And so, as leaders, I think that that's a really key component.
I've never heard that before. Personnel issues are not personal issues. I really appreciate the advice for leadership. What words of wisdom would you give for that brand new officer? And I know you gave some, kind of things that you teach in the academy, but in the context of wellness, what would you say to someone who's brand new in this career? Maybe something that you wish you would have known earlier or something that's helped you along the way.
I think that probably the best piece of advice that I can give to them is to communicate, is to talk. If there's something bothering you, then you got to say something. But I think that we need to promote that from within, not bottle things up. And I think that if you promote and cultivate an atmosphere like that, you're going to get that. Where, none of us are as smart as all of us. If you got an idea, share it. You got a problem, share it. You got a suggestion, let's hear it, kind of thing. And we need to value those folks, those newer, younger officers. We need to respect them and understand that they have a perspective and they should have a voice too. But the best piece of advice is to be a good communicator and encourage communication. Provide them with a medium to talk, to share what they have to say, whether there's something bothering them or whatnot. Because perhaps we can help them. And I cannot fix what I don't know is broken. And so if someone speaks up, even if it's something that somebody said, we have to be very careful in what we say nowadays. Every day in the news, you can see person X is apologizing for what they said here, or person Y said this, and they regret saying that, and they're apologizing, whatever. So I know we need to be careful about that, and that's kind of understood. But, again, providing a medium for them, encourage them to communicate. And even if you see a situation, kind of, I don't say force them to communicate, but encourage them. Like if there was a critical incident, like, hey, you just went on this tough call. Everything okay? And maybe a couple of days later, hey, you doing okay? How's things after that? Because that was something you don't see every day that most people don't see, and I read something recently that the average human experiences like 5 or 6 critical incidents in their lifetime,
Yeah.
where the average police officer experiences like 5 or 600 of them, some astronomical number like that. And so we see things that people aren't supposed to see, but we need to try to make sure that we're watching out for one another and helping one another before it gets too late. And it's no secret that this profession has experienced suicides for officers for a number of various reasons. And thankfully for me, I've never had one in any of my agencies, but I've seen them, I've been to funerals for them, and they're just nothing short of awful. And we always ask the question, how could we have prevented this? And it's not to suggest that you could or couldn't have, but maybe we'll never know. But if we can continue to cultivate an atmosphere of communication and understanding and mutual respect, I think that those are all small steps to get us where we need to be at.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I know we're running a little bit over. Do you have a few more minutes or do we have a hard stop? Okay.
No, I got a few.
I wanted to just ask one more thing because I think that this was one of the things that really kind of hit me when we were talking offline, that you had an officer come up to you and say, if I would have been a better dad, my son would have been a better dad.
Mm.
And we talked about the importance of home wellness. And, I know a lot of times when we talk about wellness, we talk about work wellness, and and of course you want to be able to support that organizationally. And, I know that there are, a number of things that you guys do with, providing culturally competent, people to talk to. And how do you think that we can support home wellness, or what is that message to be able to, because I know you said family first, how do you present that message to your team to prioritize their time away from the job?
So this officer with whom I spoke, he has a group of individuals that they do counseling for police officers, and there's no charge for it. They're retired. But when I met with him and talked to him, he spoke. He is raising his grandson right now,
Mm.
and the reason why he's raising his grandson is because his son isn't a better dad, and he in part blames himself. If I'd have been a better dad, if I'd have been home more, if I'd have done this, if I'd have done that, and hindsight is 2020, of course, but the emphasis that they want to put on is that to promote that wellness, to promote the home life, and you don't have to dedicate 24/7 to this job. And it's good to be a dedicated employee and a dedicated police officer, whatever rank you hold. But again, not let it consume your life. And as I said previously, I think that that's a key part of it. And it's time to hang up the uniform and go home. And when you're home, then be at home. And when I'm home, I'm not Chief, I'm John. And I go through the building and I wish people would call me by my first name. They won't.
Yeah.
I beg them to, and I've kind of resigned that they won't, although some of them do, thankfully. But you need to have that identity outside of work. And I think that this is not it's not a one size fits all. In other words, there's not, we had an officer recently that was going through some personal problems, and we had a multiple tiered approach to it because we found that, this, what we thought was going to work didn't work. And then so we went to plan B, then we went to plan C. Um, Again, because there is no one size fits all to this. And so this is the part about being resourceful. If there was a one size fits all, it would be amazing, but it doesn't exist, and we can't think that it does. And so, but at least we have to give it a shot and try. And so, if we continue to focus on that, but I would say that some of the biggest and best advice in that is that, have something outside of policing. Do not let policing consume your life, because it's not your life. And when you retire, what do you have? You need to have a life outside of policing, and you can't buy time, you can't buy health, and who's always there when you need them the most? That's your family, and you have to understand that. And your spouse has to go through some of the things that you go through, and calls in the middle of the night and, microwave dinner because you got home 4 hours later than you're supposed to, or missing your kid's ball game or a musical or, their dance lesson or whatever the case may be. Um, and I think that you need to emphasize that. And so I think that one of the things that I see and that we try to pride ourselves on is other than pay and benefits, the next biggest thing that we can give our police officers is the ability to get time off work.
Mm,
That is critical. And this next generation, we have boatloads of overtime. You can make six figures easy with overtime and more and more. And so your pension is based upon that. But this newer generation doesn't want to work a lot of overtime, and I respect that. They don't have to. I think that's probably a good thing that they do. Balance out. If we can continue on that. And just push officers in the right direction that, hey, take some time off, and just last week we had an officer come in and there was a country music uh, concert downtown Cleveland. And it was 3, 4 days beforehand. It came in, his supervisor said, "Hey, listen, I got these tickets. I know it's last minute." And the lieutenant came to me and I'm like, get the time off. Get him to this concert. I mean, not I enjoy a little bit of country music, but it's not something for
mm.
me. But it made him happy that him and his wife can go to that. And that's important. I just said to him, get him the time off that he needs. We don't really want a whole short notice request, but it's important to him, so it's important to us,
Right.
and so I think that that's really important to get that time away. And a couple of years ago, we had an officer who lost vacation time because he didn't use it, and I sat down with this officer and listened. I said, just take a long weekend with your kids, go camping, go just find something, we're going to be okay. If I get hit by a bus tomorrow, they're not going to board up the place and close it and send everybody home. Life's going to go on. And I said, not the best analogy, but understand that we're going to be okay. Take that time off, get away, go do something that you enjoy, whether it's golfing, tennis, pickleball, fishing, boating, whatever the case may be. Do those things.
Yeah, I think you're right that hindsight is 2020, and I don't think that there's anyone in this world who hasn't had those moments of like, man, I should have prioritized my family or my personal life over career life. Like I've definitely gone through that before. Some of my biggest regrets are that of thinking like I had to be at work. What are they going to do without me? They couldn't survive without me. And life is not guaranteed. We know that. No matter what, we're all going to the same place in the end. And prioritize the things that are truly important in your life and the people who are truly important in your life because one day they might not be there, and I've had that happen to me, and I try to tell that to other people too, of like just what you said. Life does go on, and they can survive without you, and it's okay. It doesn't mean that you're any less valuable. Two things can be true at once. You can be super valuable and they can be okay without you. Those two things can exist within a profession. But you know, I don't know anyone who's regretted going to their kids' game or regretted going on a long vacation, with their kids or spending a vacation with their wife or their husband so I think you're exactly right. How can you prioritize your family? How can you put that first and go home and hug your loved ones and tell them that you love them and try to make it a priority for you over work life because I do think that that's what matters in life. So I appreciate you so much. I know I took way more time than I asked from you, so thank you for coming on here and sharing your wealth of knowledge. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing all the great things that you do with the rest of your career. So thank you.
I appreciate you and what you're doing, and keep up with the mission, because if you help just one person, you've made a difference. And so, keep your eye on that prize, because I know you're impacting more than that, but keep doing what you're doing, because we need folks like you too.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We'll talk.
Okay.
All right. See you later.